Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
Well, last week we talked about the seed regulatory modernization and CFIA putting out a consultation document. We got the comments from the Canadian Seekers Association. And now we're going to hear from Seeds Canada. Joining us is Laurin Comin, who's the Director of Policy with Seeds Canada. Laurin, how are we doing?
Good. How are you, Shaun?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty
Good.
good. Okay, so I guess what is your impression of what CFIA published?
hmm So when you consider the number of resources, the amount of resources that have gone into this consultation, it's a 5-year consultation, 8, 9 task teams, volunteers, staff, industry. Um, the policy document is frankly underwhelming. Um, I think if we go back to the introduction of the seed regulatory modernization consultation, when CFIA said that, we're open to substantive change. This is a once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity. And we look at where we started and we look at what's being proposed in this document. Um, it's disappointing.
Disappointing because why? Is it's too incremental in change, or just give us a little bit more
Yeah.
a description standpoint there?
So there's a few reasons why the seed sector is disappointed, and one of those reasons is, as you mentioned, it is very incremental in change. And we were hoping that we would have a modernization, which to me says more of a step change. This was very much, a rearranging of the furniture, so to speak. And I don't think that that is unexpected given how the consultation was carried out. Rather than, at the beginning, taking a look at what are the systems around the world and in other countries where they have very successful seed systems, and kind of having that blank page and saying, what pieces do we need in our seed system? The process started with, here's the regulations we have. Let's break them into sections and let's go through each line by line and decide, what we want to change in each line. So it ended up really being an editorial exercise. And I think that's quite evident in the 52 policy recommendations or policy directions that were put out. We're not seeing any significant impact on how farmers are going to be interacting with seed, the cost of the seed, how much it costs, and how much time it takes to get a new seed product to market. And that's what we were really hoping to see an impact, because that's what it all comes down to, right? How quickly and how cheaply are farmers able to access new seed innovation?
Now, last week I mentioned we talked to CSJ, and Executive Director Doug Miller was on the show.
Mhm.
He is much happier with this report.
Yeah.
Seeds Canada describes it as underwhelming. Are there parts? These are two groups that represent the seed sector for the most part. Are there areas, Laurin, where you Seeds Canada and CSJ agree in terms of what needs to happen
Yeah.
with regulatory modernization?
Of course. I mean, the report, I don't want to say, I would throw the entire report out.
Yeah.
There are some really excellent points. The first is the recognition of the value of an external seed advisory committee. So this was something that Seeds Canada first introduced back in 2022. We were calling it the ISSB at the time. And the idea is you have experts from around the seed sector, those who are regulated and those who are impacted parties. So, farmers buying the seed. You have an external advisory committee that is actually providing advice to CFIA on the regulations, on policies, on standards. And therefore, the regulatory framework is really shaped by how the seed sector actually works. So we did see that CFIA acknowledged the importance of that advisory committee. And last winter, CFI or CSGA and Seeds Canada did release a joint statement, both groups supporting that concept. So that's something really positive that came out of the report. Another piece that's positive, I think, is incorporation by reference, which is essentially taking pieces of the regulations, removing them from the physical regulations so that you're able to amend them on a more timely basis. Now, I mean, in and of itself, that is not modernization. It's helping to facilitate future modernization, but still it's positive because when you think of standards and other pieces that may change more frequently than once every 20, once every 30 years, you really want to have a mechanism to do that without one of these, lengthy, expensive 5-year consultations.
Can you give us an example of something that Seeds Canada was pushing for, asking for that, for a lot of our audience, they're not in the seed industry. They're farmers. They're buying seed, but they're not necessarily participating in the sector from the value chain perspective. Is there an example you can give us of what you were asking for that maybe doesn't show up in this report?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that show up, but show up as flagged for future exploration, which when you consider a 5-year consultation, that should have been plenty of time for exploration. So one of those items is first party inspection of seed crops. So not having to hire a third party inspector to come out if you have adequately trained personnel to be able to do that inspection for you on site. That one was flagged in the report as explore it in the future. Given that it was raised early on and it's already available for corn and canola, we should have been able to expand that during the process. We would have liked to see the advisory committee playing a larger role than what's described in the report. We've identified some concerns regarding standard setting. CSGA, as you mentioned, is one of those bodies that does set standards, and they do have a restricted membership or board governance structure. And so you have a portion of the sector that is setting standards that are applied to the entirety of the sector. It creates a conflict of interest. And that was not adequately resolved throughout this consultation. And in fact, CSGA potentially could play a larger role in setting standards, in providing services to the sector, which could ultimately result in increased cost.
Based on what you read in the document, and I think I asked Doug the same thing, the fallout from this document, are there consequences that are potentially there based on the incremental change that was made or suggested, I should say?
Yeah, I think some of the changes aren't going to have much of an impact. They're really clarification or acknowledgement that this is how the industry was already working, and perhaps that didn't align with how the regulations were written. So let's make sure they align. That's what a lot of it is. There are some changes that we are concerned about, and most of those revolve around the alternative service delivery of services that are required to meet the regulations. So obviously CFIA, all government departments are looking to cut costs right now. So one of the ways that they can cut costs is to reduce regulations. Then they don't have to provide services for the regulations. Then they don't have to provide enforcement based on those regulations. And you either decide that the regulation is no longer needed or that the industry can suitably manage around that need using, best practices, et cetera. The other way is to essentially turn over services to another service provider. An alternative service delivery provider is what the government calls it, or an ASD. Mm-hmm. And so the regulations stay as they are. The services just move from the CFIA umbrella out to a third party. And that is what CFIA is looking to do. So we would have much rather had CFIA look at those regulations that require that service and say, are these regulations still necessary? By just moving them out the door to another organization, you're not making any significant changes to the sector to improve. Potentially, we could see increased costs because those third parties are no longer under the same, restrictions or guidelines in terms of increasing cost and cost recovery. So, I think we could see a lot of future potentially negatives from alternative service delivery if there aren't suitable controls put in place by CFIA when those contracts are written out.
I had one member of the audience that said to me, you know what? It's good for the farmer if seed companies are unhappy with what's being suggested. I also had other members of the audience quite upset that Canada wasn't, looking to significantly reduce the regulatory environment.
Mm.
And so the audience is kind of mixed on this. What do you say to those two comments?
So, the seed sector relies on having the farmer as a customer base. So, really, we talk all the time about making sure that our customer is happy, making sure that we can provide our customer with what they need. We want our customer to be able to access the latest, greatest innovation, and we want to motivate them to access that innovation by having costs be as low as possible. So we want to get a good product out the door as fast as possible for as low as cost as possible. When the seed sector is unhappy, it's because we see regulations and we see changes that don't allow us to do that. So as the farmer, if you want, all the barriers to be thrown in place, and maybe you have a great product coming out the end, but the cost is astronomical and you're limited in choice. If that to you is an ideal situation, then, perhaps you would be happy with the result and you would be happy with the seed sector not being overly thrilled with what we're seeing. But I don't think most farmers are looking for that. Most farmers that I know, from my experience working with them, they want to have a choice in the seed that they're able to get. They wanted to be able to get it at the same time or sooner than their competitors around the world. They want the cost to be low enough that they're not tempted to use subpar seed from the bin or common seed from the neighbor. They also want to be able to turn over their variety to the newest, latest, and greatest as quickly as possible. So they're not growing the same thing for 7 years. They're moving on because the seed sector every year is able to push out something better.
Okay, quickly, where do we go from here? What happens?
So, we have the consultation right now. It closes October 3rd. Seeds Canada, being a membership-based organization, has been working with our membership to develop our submission. So we're hoping to firm up our submission shortly. After the consultation closes, CFIA, I assume, is going to take some time to review what they see through the consultation. And then things will move to another consultation in Canada Gazette 1. So, in 5 years, we're not quite done yet. We'll have at least another year to go. But I do encourage everyone to take a look and to pay attention to what the industry is saying, and submit by October 3rd.
Great stuff. Hey, Laurin, thanks so much for joining us here today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun.